with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "I've come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already blazing. There is a baptism with which I must be baptized, and how great is my anguish until it is accomplished. Do you think that I've come to establish peace on the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. A father will be divided against his son, and a son against his father. A mother against her daughter, and a daughter against her mother. A mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." The Gospel of the Lord. All right, I just got to say this. Jesus got to be feeling pretty good right now, right? All this division, mother-in-law against father-in-law and all of that, right? Bam! True words, right? So look, seriously. Jesus' message back then was very radical for his time. And it's radical for our time as well. He tells us love everyone, including enemies, including people we don't know, including people on the fringes of society. He says, give up anything, let go of anything that prevents you from loving, even if it means giving up something you've worked your whole life for. Give it away in order to love more. Radical, right? His message was very radical, and it was resonating deep with people, with a lot of people. And that message was a very real threat to the Jewish and Roman leadership. And he knew they were going to kill him for it. But he also had a sense that this message of love was so strong and so powerful that even if he died, people would carry forth with it. And that same leadership, we're not going to let that go on. And there would be persecutions. And sure enough, there were persecutions. And people scattered, right? And so people found themselves in little groups. Didn't have a catechism to look up stuff. Didn't have a Bible to look up stuff. If they did, a lot of them didn't read anyway. And so they just had to go on what they believed Jesus was calling them to do, to live that life of love. And they came face to face with a lot of resistance, just as Jesus did. And they had to go in there and deal with that conflict, try to convince someone who came from a totally different culture, who saw the world differently, to see it through the eyes of love, through the eyes that Jesus calls us to look at the world. And there was a lot of conflict. But there was great good comes out of that conflict. You see, out of that conflict, out of that one-on-one arguments and discussions, that's where everything we believe, our Catholic beliefs, that's where they emerge from. Not just those 3 years that Jesus' public ministry. For example, after Jesus died, Peter and Paul got in this knockdown, drag-out fight about how to treat the Gentiles, right? Our faith is ever growing, ever learning. It took to the 3rd century before we said, hey, Mary is the mother of God. It was just 50 years ago that we thought, hey, you know what? It won't hurt to have Mass in your own language, right? It was just 35 years ago, Pope St. John Paul II gave us theology of the body. And Pope Francis is adding to that. But we also add to that. we also add to that. We still have a lot of conflicts going on, right? About almost any place you look. Politics, church, doctrine, family. And what's going to determine whether we have the fire, whether those conflicts bring us together as they did back then, is the quality of our communication. If we have great quality of communication around our conflicts and disagreements, we'll come together. We will be that fire that Jesus lit. But if we're not careful, it can keep us and separate us and let that fire die down. Look, let me be real clear. Defensiveness is a crippler for communication. When someone becomes defensive, our communication quality drops way off. And why are we defensive? Look, we all have weaknesses. And we tend to build those defenses, our strongest defenses, around our weakest weaknesses. For example, James and John, pride or ego was so weak, after a Samaritan village said, hey, we don't want you, they said, hey, Jesus, should we call down fire from heaven to destroy them? Jesus, on the other hand, had no such problem. The strength of his ego was such that it didn't matter. And he just said no and just moved on to another village. He didn't need to do that. Our defensiveness, you can tell, comes across because it comes across in a lot of different ways. In strong, this is the way it's got to be, to I just don't want to talk about it. I remember one guy who literally would slam his hand down and say, you can't have any doubts. I'm thinking, hey, we all have doubts, right? Why do we do that? Why do we dig in so much and get defensive and get where we don't want to talk about stuff? And I would say it's fear. Fear that you're going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to relieve you all of that. I don't know what I'm talking about. Fear that we're going to have to eat some of the words we put out there. Fear that we're going to find out we're wrong. Fear that we're going to get in touch with something that we really don't want to go there. Right? It's all of that fear. But we don't have to live. We don't have to let that fear dictate what we do. We can have the courage to overcome that. We have to be careful that we don't let fear do something like saying, when I have a disagreement or I don't like something, that I throw the proverbial bomb over the wall. And the way we do that is through text messages and FaceTime and emails, right? We just throw it over there and hide behind, hoping it doesn't come back. Really? Look, when we do those kind of things, when we use email, text, and all that, we're dropping down the quality of our conversations and all that to maybe, 40% at best? We know that 60 to 80% of everything we communicate comes through nonverbals, not the words. But we're real quick to just go to the words and throw it over the fence. We don't need to live to that fear. If we are going to continue to be that fire that Jesus lit, we have to find a way to get past our fears. We have to find a way to be willing to go where we don't want to go a lot of times. We have to be willing to see the world through someone else's eyes, someone who hasn't had the same life experiences as we do. We have to be willing to understand their point of view. So how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we make it safe for someone to express something that they really are fearful about? How do we create that situation? I got to tell you, one of the things that I have found most useful is to just listen. I'm not talking about hearing, I'm talking about listening. I'm talking about trying to put ourselves here, not just hear every word, but hear what's behind those words. To pay attention to all of the nonverbals. To pay attention to whether the tone of voice, the body language, all of it. To come face to face. That's the way the persecution made it happen. It was face-to-face communications. We have to be willing to listen, even if we're hearing something we don't want to hear, even if we're hearing something that hurts us, and certainly if it's a different point of view. And when we do that, another word for doing that is loving that person in front of us. And when we love the person in front of us enough to put aside our own agenda to listen to them, in a very real way, we reduce their fears. We heal them in a small way. And then maybe out of that, they are feeling good enough, strong enough to hear our point of view. And now we can make progress. We can add to our body of knowledge, our understanding about what it means to live this radical message Jesus gave us 2,000 years ago. Amen?